All right, construction champions, it's your host, Ron Nussbaum, and we're here for another amazing episode of Construction Champions Podcast, where we're burning the house down twice a week, every Monday and Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern. You can find myself here with an amazing guest talking about how we become champions in the construction industry. Super excited today, as always. But if you guys notice, if you guys are on video, I am back to standing. That means I'm going to be bringing the damn heat. No more sitting down on the job here. No more recording episodes just in a seat. I'm back to standing. I'm back to bringing that intensity. I never stopped bringing the intensity, but I'm a lot more comfortable right now standing once again. So I'm excited about that. You guys might not be. You're probably sitting in a truck headed to the job site right now. But here we are. And we have another amazing guest today. Kat, it is great to have you here with us.
Thanks, Ron. It's great to talk with you today. Thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. I look forward to our conversation. But before we dive in there, why don't you tell all the champions out there a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, it's nice to meet everybody. My name is Kat. I am the owner and operator of Kat&Co. We are a business operations consultancy that specializes in full service support, strategy, and partnership for creative companies. We primarily work with interior designers, custom furniture makers, fine artists, and the like.
Awesome. So we're going to dive right in there. That's how we always do it here on Construction Champions, is we get right into it. And I'm going to ask you the $1,000,000 question. And that is, what makes a construction champion? Hey, construction champions. It's your host, Ron Nussbaum here. And I want to talk to you about how you can automate all of your marketing. We've had so many people on here talk about getting the systems in place. Well, we have partnered with Build 12 and Construction Champions podcast. Les O'Hara, the founder, what really excites me is his 30 years in the industry. And now he's built a system to be able to nurture your leads and continue to utilize that. I personally use the system myself. Build 12 is absolutely amazing. There's a lot of value in there, and it's a way to start getting away from Angie's List and all of that kind of stuff and start actually creating your own leads every day and have a system for them. So go on our website, check out the show notes, go check out Build 12 and what it can do for the front end of your business today. It's absolutely amazing. I highly recommend going and meeting with Les and his son, Devin, and talking to him about what they built for their own business so the rest of the industry can take benefit from that. Here on Construction Champions, we're all about helping each other out. And what is better than contractors helping contractors? I say nothing. So let's go take this to the next level. Go check out Build 12. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me or Les or his son, Devin. We're here to help. We want to continue to grow the industry.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this, and I think it boils down to communication, pure and simple. Everything from upholding the expectations for your team on site, knowing what a good job done looks like for your team and for the client, communication with vendors, subs, maybe your interior design team that you're partnering with, and ultimately the client, right? I'm sure we both know how quickly a project can go off the rails without proper communication. And something I think we have in common is one of the common requests from my interior design clients is how they can improve communication between themselves and their build team partners. So it's pretty industry agnostic, I would say.
Ding, 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 ding. Communication is one of the biggest issues in construction, has been for over 40 years.
I eat, sleep, and breathe communication at this point in time in my life. But I'm always excited when somebody else is here to talk about that, and that's what they feel like takes to be a champion, because it really allows us to unlock even better perspectives. So when you're talking with your clients and they're talking about that communication breakdown and how do we improve that, what are some of the tips that you have for them?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things that comes to mind is being extremely specific with your schedules, specifications, right? If you're handing off something to your construction team to then take it to site and execute it, do they have everything they need? Are
Mm.
they going to be able to look at your plans and your lighting schedule, perhaps your decorative lighting schedule, and know exactly what is required of them in terms of placement and, wattage and all that fun stuff? Or is it unclear, leaving room for potential errors to happen, potential chances for assumptions, which can kind of spiral out of control quickly. Um, but even before that, I think, talking with your build team and saying, how do you like to be communicated to? How can we work together as partners on this project for the success of our client? What does that look like? Is that a weekly meeting on site together? Is that a phone call every other day? How do they like to see their communication or their documents represented? And just figure that out. You may have to adjust your process per project slightly, but if it's ultimately for this, streamlined communication for both teams, I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I mean, it's communication costs the average construction business of 100 employees or less, or miscommunication, not communication. Miscommunication costs the average construction business of 100 employees or less over $400,000 a year in rework and go backs. So it's a major problem. And I think I got a really good question, because you deal with the interior designers, the build, everything. I think a lot of times we run into like dialogue and language barriers where we're talking about the same thing, but we're literally using completely different terms. And
Yeah,
that causes a lot of confusion in the industry, not taking the time to standardize it and just figure out, like, if this is who's doing the building, I'm doing the designing, like, what do we call what? So everybody's on the same page. I think like that just helps so much when we take the time to provide that clarity there.
absolutely. Yeah, and a piece of advice that was given to me a long time ago is, if you're trying to figure out how to represent a piece of information to someone else, the way that you're describing it to them, could you figure it out with that with that description or not? Because if you're telling someone in a super vague way, that you wouldn't know what you're talking about yourself, like how are they supposed to figure it out? So yeah, that goes back to maybe differences in terminology, but it could be as simple as using images, using a quick FaceTime, using the plans instead of just giving a vague area on, this part of the primary bedroom. You could literally mark it up on the plan, be as specific as possible, because without the specifics, you're leaving room for error.
Yeah, no, I love that, being able to understand what you're saying, because sometimes we can get I look at it from the construction side of things,
Mm.
and you can get really deep into your jargon and what it like how we reference stuff and lose everybody. And then all it does is create confusion. A lot of times people don't want to say, hey, hold on a minute, I didn't understand that, because they feel like, well, I mean, if that's what they're saying, I guess I should just understand it. And they don't have any clue. And then that's what leads to all these problems. I love reevaluating, like, could I figure it out if I didn't know? I always say, like, just take out the key words that are very industry specific And if you couldn't figure it out, like you said, with those, like you need to rephrase that. And that's
Mhm.
across the board. That's not just a construction problem. That's a branding and marketing problem. How many times have we all been on, say, a website and we're not 100% sure what exactly this company does or what does that look like?
Mhm.
Like it happens all the time, and that's a communication breakdown before you're even starting the project.
Mhm. Yes, I relate to that. And also going back to that, how describing a task, let's just say for an example, to your team is different how you would describe it to the client as well. So there's all these different ways that you're interpreting the same task or the same issue. Um, but yeah, just something to keep in mind. Perhaps it's using those terms that are kind of more broad so that differing teams can be on the same page.
Yeah, because it's construction, it's just so unique because there's so many different stakeholders that you can have. You can have the client, you can have the builder, the subcontractors, and the interior designer, and then like all these different moving pieces, and we all talk different, but we have to come together to create the end outcome that we're trying to create.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, agree.
I think a lot of times, like you had said about using pictures, that's a way underutilized way of doing things. We used to put in all of our contracts, all of our proposals, a picture. It would almost be like a glossary for like, here's what this is. So like if you didn't understand what something was, is you could go there and here's a picture with what that product is. So
Mhm.
everybody was on the same page. Because we do sometimes have to use very specific terms that we can't generalize. But we need to be able to get everybody on the same page. So presenting that up front, so like a glossary or I don't know what else you would call that, but a place where people can go and see, okay, yes, visually, I understand what they're talking about now.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the schedules as they're called in interior design, which is not how other people call schedules, differing terms, right? Like a lighting schedule, for example, is going to have each line item of each specification, where it's located, what the item looks like, an actual image, which finish, which, dimensions, which size, whatever, where is it being. I mean, there's so many details involved, but really simplifying it to that level, I think helps prevent any, misinterpretation.
Yeah, yeah, which is I can tell you from experience, because I'm an advocate for if you're a builder or remodeler working with interior designers, like I think it takes a big burden off of you to have to design this stuff and do all of that. It lets the homeowner work with somebody that specializes in that. And me and my wife remodeled a house, and we had a builder and a designer, and there's confusion between everybody because of like what you're talking about is we just have to learn to work together when it comes to this kind of stuff. And it's the same disconnect that can happen with the subcontractors. I mean, stuff happens all the time on job sites that could easily be controlled if we were just more clearer and just simpler. Like we make stuff so complex and there's really not a reason to make it complex. Like it's really simple. We
Mhm.
build shit and like you just got to put it up.
Yeah, and in your example you just gave, I'm sure being in the client seat for that project and you're picking up on maybe some disagreements or, whatever between the build team and the designer, I'm sure that didn't feel good to kind of get that side feeling of,
Well,
am I
it's
here?
there's a happy medium about what what can be done, what is possible, and what fits in the budget. And I think that's why it's so important to have all parties involved in all conversations. Because I think a lot of times what happens is that the builder's like, okay, just get with the designer and get everything together and then I'll build it. Well, then there's no control over what's possible or what that budget's going to actually end up looking like when it's all said and done. It gets turned over to the builder. And that's saying he's like, well, this is like 200 grand over budget. Like, how am I supposed to do this for what? And I don't even know if this is feasible. With the conversations, you just have to have them all together. Like that's how we start to make it better for the customers. That in piece is to have these conversations together.
Yes. Agreed. Because yeah, like you said, if there's scope creep, if maybe the designer is over designing the space unintentionally, they might not know if there are more cost-effective options out there to get the same effect. And that's really where they can lean on their build team to kind of help them value engineer where needed, you know, and really get the desired effect the client is after, but in a situation where they're not kind of cutting into each other's budgets and then having issues because of that. So I totally agree with that. I'd love to know if you have any tips that I can pass along to my clients on ways, maybe from the build side of things, what are ways that interior designers can show up better and present the information better to their construction partners?
Yeah, I think having a so like what I was talking about is just the dialogue that we use, like we're all guilty of it, is figuring out because chances are as a designer, you're going to have specific builders that you work with more often than not. Because you're going to start building that relationship, starting to understand what they call anything is I feel very critical because if you use that language when you're working with the client and then they're using that language when they're working with the client, that creates a camaraderie there. The client's never confused. We went through this with like our sales department and our installation department. Use two different terminologies for the exact same stuff, and it confused the customer. So we had to standardize that. And you can do that by working with the builders that you're working with as an interior designer. And there's going to be some give and take on both sides. It's going to be what makes the most sense to call this. Well, how do we talk about this? And I think one of the number one pieces of advice that I can give interior designers is invite the builder to be part of the design process. We had a great guest on here that like he has a pre-build contract that he does with homeowners where it's however much an hour and he's involved, but he helps control the budget. He's there to bounce stuff off of in every meeting leading up to it. So you don't get the division that happens. Because if you have the homeowner, the client, just meeting with the designer and then just meeting with the builder, there can be strife there for no reason at all. Just other than no, they're not on the same page. So creating an environment where that builder can be involved in the design phase. And then for all the builders out there listening, I would say create an environment where that designer can be involved in the build phase. Because the more time that designer spends on the actual build phase of that, like if they're there when the building's happening, they're going to understand how construction works a lot different. And it's going to help in future projects because they're going to be able to put two and two together. A lot of times, what you hear is like they just don't want to do that. Not that they can't do it, they just don't want to. It would be too hard. But then you show up at the job site and you see stuff ripped apart and you start to understand why they didn't want to do that or why it's not possible. And that's the advice I would give to actually both parties is you just create a relationship.
I love that. And I echoing what you had just said. I think that instead of when you're met with a no, we can't do that, you can have, that's the start of a conversation, right? That's not the end of a conversation.
Yes.
You can, why? Tell me more about that. What are the challenges that you're facing? What if we attacked it from this other way? Are there any suggestions that you would suggest to me as the expert? You know, we all have different expertise that we're bringing to the table, and we can use that to help the project succeed overall. And then I think in addition to being involved in the beginning as much as possible from both sides, absolutely. And then also, if you're building that long-term partnership, having a meeting once a project wraps, after punch is done, and say, how did this go? You know, what were the pitfalls throughout the project? Maybe what are some areas that the client was not so happy? How could we have done it differently? And for our next project together, what are some maybe red flags that we should both be on the lookout for?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that, because did the vision come to fruition? Like, is what we built what you envisioned? And where I love that, because it's like the post game wrap up. Like, it matters just as much. And I want to jump back to when you were talking about the conversation. Like, it's just we can't do that, is the start of a conversation. And if it's something that the client really wants, like, have just letting that be known, like, this is something that really matters to the client. Now the builder should know that, because the builder should be involved in these conversations and understand that that matters. Like, how can we get there? Like, is there a way to get to where this is included, or we do it this way, or can we reconfigure something so something can be somewhere else? There's all kind. That's the great thing about remodeling and building, is like, if you're building custom stuff, it's a pain in the ass, but there's flexibility in that.
Yeah. And it's a matter of also making sure you're understanding of what the client's actual needs are and where they are willing to maybe adjust their investment. If they're really, if they have this idea in their mind of this one particular thing and they just can't let it go and they want it above everything else, okay, can we shift maybe some of your investment to maybe some lower touch areas and put it there? So it's just, again, a conversation. How can we get to that spot?
Yeah. And like a simple terminology so like, when we were working with the designer and builder, is in our original design, is we had a big double fridge, and that put us way over budget. Didn't quite understand how much those fridges actually cost until we were out looking at them. And we worked with the builder and designer, is like, well, okay, so like, this is like 15 grand more than what we thought this was going to be. And the builder was like, well, how can we work together to make that happen and remove other stuff? Because he's like, I'm going to tell you, that's not something that you want to do afterwards. Like, if you want that fridge, we need to do it now, because it's going to be a disaster to do it later. And ask the designer, is like, what can we redesign? What could we do later that's not going to be as disruptive as changing a fridge out, where we can bring this scope of work back down within budget?
Yeah.
And then later on, we can add that stuff. And I thought that was a great conversation, because we were able to figure it out to where we got that fridge put in, because like, that was going to be a pain in the ass later. But there was some other stuff that would have to be done down the road. Now, we sold the house, so we never did that stuff. But like, it's prioritizing that stuff and looking at it not just from what can be like long term, what's going to be the best result for that client.
Yes. And I think going back to what you're saying earlier, if the designer is there on site with the build team and is kind of getting a feel for the the pace of the construction, it'll get easier over time, right? But I think a lot of designers may need to lean on their build teams for that exact reason on the order of operations, right? Like if you have a panel ready fridge, I'm assuming it was panel ready with custom cabinetry, but for that example, if that's the case, that needs to be addressed way sooner than maybe a decorative lighting pendant that's just going to be installed at the end, right? But that timeline and order of operations might not come as naturally to designers. So, they might be fighting for just the overall look, but not know exactly at what point do we need to be addressing these issues.
Yeah, no, that definitely, I couldn't agree more with that, because that is stuff's happening. Like you don't want that, the operations side of that to not align with what's happening. Because the last thing you want to do is be trying to make these adjustments in real time.
And then you're like, oh no, the lead time is 50 weeks.
Yeah.
At the last moment, right? Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Well, it's been great having you on the show here today. For all the listeners out there, if they wanted to connect with you, follow you, learn more about what you do, where's the best places for them to do that?
Yeah. Best place I would say is my website. It's Kat&Co spelled out. So KATANDCO.org, catandco.org. On there, you can get information about, frequently asked questions about working with me, what my typical services are, the types of programs I work with, request pricing, and put in a request for discovery call, which I offer 30-minute, complimentary discovery calls for anyone who might be interested.
Awesome. And thank you for taking the time to be on the show today.
Thanks, Ron. It was great talking with you. I appreciate it.
Awesome. All right, construction champions, another episode in the bag where we talked about one of my favorite subjects, communication. If you've been listening for any amount of time, communication is what I feel needs to be fixed in the construction industry. If this is your first episode, communication needs to be fixed in the construction industry. And it's not just the miscommunication, it's the dialogue we use, the language we use when we talk, understanding all of that, understanding the perspectives of who you're talking to, whether that's a client, a designer, a subcontractor, an employee, your wife, your kids. Like these are all opportunities to be a better communicator and understand how do you convey yourself. And I think here's a great one for all you guys listening, because a lot of you guys are guys, and Kat said this, is if you don't understand what you're saying, like if you couldn't take that and understand it, then now the party's not going to be able to understand it. Understand that when you're talking to your wife. That's a good one. Like if you're saying, if you couldn't even digest what you're saying, she probably can't, could cause strife. Now I'm not here for any of the marriage counseling or anything like that, but that popped into my mind. Like I was like, wow, like if you're talking to your significant other, your kids, and you couldn't even unpack what you're saying, do you think they could? Do you think your employees could? Like communication isn't just between you and your client. Like communications between everybody in your business. And as being the business owner, it's our job to become a master at this. Whether we think it's our job or not, it is. We have to be the gold standard of what great communication looks like. And it all starts with listening and then understanding what we say. So champions, make sure you go check out all of our fantastic sponsors. And until next time, be the champion you were meant to be.
Introducing BuilderComms, your all-in-one construction communication software. Say goodbye to communication mishaps that cause frustration among builders, contractors, and clients. The BuilderComms platform unifies communications, making it easy for you to chat, share updates, and collaborate effectively in one place. Experience the transformation in construction project management with BuilderComms. Visit us at buildercoms.com to learn more and start streamlining your projects today.